event.
So with Emerald Ash Borer in St. Paul, and it's expanding out, you're learning as you're going with this process. How are you engaging the citizens of St. Paul, trying to at least get them to know what's going on?
I think the outreach efforts at first were kind of slow going. Everybody was just really concerned with dealing with the infestation and getting the quarantine going and all of that. But now we've really had time to kind of look at what we can do as far as outreach goes. And so we've been, from the city standpoint, we've been working with our district councils, which they're really there to be kind of an interface between the city and the community. So we've been working with them as far as getting stuff on their websites, seeing what they can do to help us get the word out that there are best management practices for dealing with ash trees now, just as there are with elm and oak. So we really want to push that, you can't really be trimming ash trees or removing them, especially in the infested areas, pretty much from May until September. So we are trying our hardest to kind of get the word out on that. The MDA has the Don't Move Firewood campaign, and that's really big in the state. The problem for the city is that we can't really do anything about the firewood issue as far as moving it within the city, because the quarantine is 2 counties. So if people are going to be moving stuff, that's kind of what they're going to do. But we are working on a survey of the infested area for citizens to fill out, and it kind of touches on awareness of emerald ash borer, communication, what the citizens think is the best way to communicate with the public, and then what their kind of management is going to be for their private property, if they're going to be removing their ash trees, if they even know if they have ash trees on their property, or if they're going to decide to treat the ash trees with an insecticide. So just to kind of gauge what people are thinking about the whole infestation and where it's going.
And when you get that information, you're going to share that?
Yes.
That would be great.
We will. We definitely will.
Now, you and I were out 2 days ago, and we're going to show some footage of that during this interview. It was pretty impressive, the number of trees that are being removed. You said there was, what, 1,200 or so?
We've identified, I think when we initially went out, we identified around 1,500. And then when we found out what the funding would be, we kind of scaled back to 1,100. But that includes the infested area, and we didn't really have an idea of the number that would be there. So once we do the infested trees, and then, we're also going to have to do infested trees next spring and even this fall. So kind of have to leave a little bit of room in there for those trees. But the crews are working so fast and efficiently that I think we'll probably be able to do more with the funding that we received. So
these are St. Paul crews that are actually going out and removing the boulevard trees.
Yep, we haven't, the only thing that we contract out is planting, and that's normal. We always contract out our planting. But the removals, the stump removal, the cleanup is all being done essentially by one crew, but it is I think it's a 7-man crew right now, and usually a crew is more like 4 or 5, so it is a bit bigger, but they're working pretty fast. So.
And the majority of what are you doing with the wood once the trees are removed?
They pretty much just take it down to Pig's Eye. It's the Environmental Wood Supply is the nonprofit that runs Pig's Eye Processing. So they process all of the wood down there, and then it's brought over to District Energy downtown and burned to power downtown St. Paul.
Oh, so it's actually benefiting St. Paul.
Yeah, it is utilized. A lot of people are, well, why are you just chopping it up and burning it? And well, if you didn't have to burn, if you weren't burning wood, you'd be burning some other fossil fuel. So it's kind of a.
And with the wood, it has to be chipped up and burnt just so the beetles don't survive and aren't transported around as well, correct?
Well, if you were going to use the wood for something else, they have a lot of different techniques that you can use to utilize the wood differently. As far as if you were going to chip it just for mulch, it would just have to be below, I think, the 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 in any 2 dimensions. Okay. So the chippers do have to get it down to a pretty small size. If you're going to use it for firewood, it needs to be treated. If you're going to use it for lumber, it needs to be debarked. So for our purposes, or for what the wood that we bring down there is used for, they actually, I think, chip it and then put it in a tub grinder. So it's pretty much pulverized.
So it's an effective way of eliminating the emerald ash borer threat from the wood and getting a benefit out of it by actually feeding it back into the St. Paul power grid.
Yeah, and the Environmental Wood Supply is really working with us as far as making sure that any ash debris that we bring down there, we let them know that it is ash or that it might be infested, especially the trees that we know are infested. So when we bring that down, they process it pretty much immediately. And that was the same last spring when we were bringing the trees down in June and we knew that some of the stuff was infested. They were processing it immediately after we had already chipped it on site. So. Okay.
Now we were talking earlier about new finds that you're finding now, and I know that the Prospect Park in Minneapolis, they identified it by noticing woodpecker, fresh woodpecker damage, and so essentially that's what you're finding now in the spring is the new woodpeckers, which indicate that the beetles are probably there in the trees.
Yeah, the MDA started a survey, I think in either late January or early February, where a crew was going out and pretty much in the infested areas, essentially looking at every ash tree that they could find, both private and public property trees. And they were kind of looking at the woodpecker damage, the newer woodpecker damage on the trees, which is really apparent right now since there's no leaves, obviously. And the new damage is really pretty bright yellow, so you can see it easily, and they were using binoculars to find it up in the higher canopy. But they identified quite a few more infested trees that are definitely infested. They could see the woodpecker had exposed either a bark crack in the tree or a gallery that they could see. So they identified quite a few infested trees that way, and then they have a kind of a list of suspect trees, and they based that on how much new woodpecker damage there was in the tree, and so they did find quite a few of those as well.
So this is not a problem that's going to go away once we remove the ash that are right around that infested area, is it?
No, and you know, we're not going to remove all of them even this year. We're removing the ones that are kind of highly suspect, because we know that those are pretty heavily infested. Just yesterday we did a field day and we took 4 trees down so that people got experience kind of sampling those trees. And 2 of the trees we knew were infested, and 2 of the trees we suspected were, but weren't really sure because you can only see stuff in the higher canopy. And basically they did just base that on the woodpecker damage, and we found that the 2 suspect trees were pretty heavily infested in the canopies. So it seems like it's a pretty good indicator of the infestation. So, you know, we're going to be finding trees every year, and we don't want to take every ash tree out of that area because we're kind of trying to keep it contained for as long as possible. Obviously, we know it's going to continue to spread out, but if we can keep it there and continue to kind of knock back the population every year, that's kind of the goal.
What kind of advice can you give to some of these communities that, you know, are not Minneapolis, not St. Paul? It hasn't been identified yet, but it is going to get there. From your experiences, I know you've only had it for a year, but what from your experiences can you provide to a lot of these communities that are going to be dealing with this?
I think that from what I've heard and from what I know from experience now, the one really important thing to do is have an ash inventory. Actually, to have an entire tree inventory if you can, but knowing where the ash are and knowing the numbers both on public and private property. Like I said, we don't have that information right now, but we are currently working on the public property side of it to get an idea of where all those trees are. And I know that's going to be really hard for a lot of small communities and communities like Minnetonka, where it's all pretty much private property trees, but even to just GPS them or something and have an idea of where they are, that's probably the #1 thing. And also just starting on the outreach ahead of time, getting homeowners aware and getting every level of the community aware of emerald ash borer and the potential impact is probably one of the major things. And also looking at replacement options for trees. The older dying ash trees, start removing them. Don't wait until they're dead and falling apart.
Yeah, kind of essentially preventively removing, just so you don't have a huge mass of trees that all die at once.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to be pretty realistic about it in St. Paul. We know that removing these 1,100 trees this year, it's like 3% of the boulevard ash inventory. So we know that we're not making a huge dent, but these are some of the worst off trees that we're taking out. So the hope is that, as more ash trees continue to die, and if the number gets so large that the city isn't able to work on it in that capacity, and we would maybe need to contract some of the work out, that the worst trees aren't falling on cars and streets and sidewalks and people. So
this really is a long-term issue.
Yeah.
You have to plan for this year, next year, and 10 years down the road. And
yeah, I mean, we're really just trying to mitigate the impact not only on the urban forest but the budget, because it's, if we end up with 10,000 dead ash trees on the boulevard, it's the entire city is going to take a pretty huge hit on the budget. So we are just trying to work as fast as we can to get some of these out.
Okay. And so you actually are going to have working with neighborhood groups, getting the message out, and are you willing to actually assist other communities with their planning process too? Minneapolis
came over and helped us with chipping trees for a week and a half, and they didn't ask us for anything in return. So we definitely, if there's situations like that, we're willing to help.
So it may be a problem, but it's actually an opportunity, bringing communities together to kind of deal with an issue.
Yeah, I think it really needs to be. I know some of the smaller communities north of us, Falcon Heights and Roseville, and those places have been kind of trying to get a group effort together, because a lot of them don't have a full-time forestry staff. They contract out a lot of their work, and so I know they were having some community meetings as a larger group to try to look at the situation and figure out what to do. I think having been the first city to have found it kind of put us into a gear of we need to deal with the infestation really quickly. And so the ability for us to offer our services to a lot of communities probably isn't that high, because we have a pretty huge number of ash trees on our own to take care of. But we are trying to help as much as we can with the outreach efforts.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel.
Thanks.
Next session, we'll actually be talking with the city forester from the city of Minnetonka, and we'll be talking about some of those communities that are fortunate enough not to be infested yet are doing to manage emerald ash borer. Thank you. Why Trees Matter is brought to you by the Urban Forestry Institute. Our sponsor today was Rainbow Tree Care Companies, Science, Service, and Satisfaction. Our guest today was provided by the city of St. Paul, Minnesota, the most livable city in America.